What do you remember about Alaska? Do you remember having trees, snow, ice, icebergs, rivers? Do you remember Alaska having sand?
Alaska is home to 3 major dune fields, as well as a number of smaller ones. The Great Kobuk and Little Kobuk sand dunes are about 10 miles away from one another in Kobuk Valley National Park in the northwestern part of the state. All in all, they take up 46 square miles of land and often are quite tall, towering over the trees beneath them. The enormous expanses of sand stand out largely because of their location. They sit within the Arctic. In some areas, groves of pine forests are surrounded or partially buried by sand, the tips of the trees jutting out of the dunes. In others, the trees are moving back, forest pushing its way into the sand. In the Great Kobuk sand dunes, a river divides the dune field in half, slicing down the middle and creating a break in the desert-like landscape. Each of the dune fields are active, the sand moving and shifting, slowly migrating across the region. The dunes take up about 16,000 acres, but are all that remains of a much larger series of sand deposits across Alaska. 200,000 acres of ancient dunes have mostly been transformed into plant and tree-covered sandy soil. Like many of the world's strangest geographic anomalies, the dunes were formed due to glaciation. As ancient glaciers grew and then receded, they crushed parts of the mountainous landscape they passed over, leaving behind smaller rocks in their wake. Strong winds then blew the rocks into one another, pulverizing them further into sand and leaving behind these incredible fields of sand dunes. The Kobuk Dunes were a large part of the reason that Kobuk Valley was made into a national park.
Might make you think that you're in a vast desert such as the Sahara. Yet, something is not right. As we look around, there's surprisingly abundant water running in adjacent rivers which cut across some of the dunes. There are also numerous conifer trees and occasional visible wolf prints. There are abundant caribou, occasional moose, and even sometimes brown bears. And this area receives several inches of snowfall each year. We are not in a desert climate, but rather a cold climate north of the Arctic Circle. This region is the infamous Kobuk Sand Dunes, which are located in west-central Alaska. With the Great Kobuk Sand Dunes covering an area of 25 square miles, this feature is even visible from satellite. Yet, these sand dunes are not an isolated geologic oddity, as Alaska has 3 other medium to large sand dune complexes. So, how did a desert-like landmass of numerous sand dunes grow in such a cold climate? The answer is not an ancient warm spell, but rather relates to the abundant glaciers which once covered much of the state at the peak of the last ice age 22,000 years ago. At the time, ice sheets covered nearly 300,000 square miles of the state, consisting of 3 different massive blocks of material. One of these ice sheets covered the massive Brooks Range in the northern part of the state with several thousand and occasionally several miles thick of ice. As this large glacial mass advanced across the landscape, it ground the rock beneath it, pulverizing much of it into a fine sand after an extensive period of time. Thus, when the ice sheets began to retreat, the sand particles within the glacier flowed into streams, eventually being deposited into an area with no major outlet, as it was surrounded on all sides by high terrain. In this case, the site of the eventual Great and Little Kobuk sand dunes. Additional material was blown in by wind, as the adjacent mountain ranges on 3 sides provided a natural trap where much of this material would fall. This process occurred over thousands of years until a more than 100-foot thick layer of pulverized rock, largely from the Brooks Range glaciers, covered an area of 313 square miles. As for the sand which was deposited, I want to remind my audience that sand describes an abundance of a rock grain size generally accepted to be between 1/16 of a millimeter and 2 millimeters in diameter. Any smaller would be silt and any larger would be considered a granule. In the more than 10,000 years since, vegetation has repopulated much of the original larger dune field and topsoil formed, causing the dunes to shrink to less than 10% of their original size. Thus, what was once a vast single giant sand dune is now the Great Kobuk and Little Kobuk sand dunes, in addition to a series of numerous but far smaller sand dunes to the south of the Little Kobuk sand dunes. Today, much of these dunes are protected as part of the massive Kobuk Valley National Park, which covers an area which is vast, being slightly larger than the entire state of Delaware. Less than 12,000 people visited this national park in 2021, but there is a possibility that you might be outnumbered by another animal there, caribou. Twice a year, during the fall and spring, as many as 300,000 of these creatures pass through the area of the national park during their yearly migration to and from two different points.
The Great Kobuk Sand Dunes. The state of Alaska is one of the most unique places in the United States and the world. It's the last bastion of true nature, untouched by man in the country. It's the largest state in the United States by land area, covering over 663,000 square miles. And despite its vast size, it's also the least densely populated state. In some parts of Alaska during the summer, the sun doesn't set for an extended period. Conversely, during the winter, certain areas experience the polar night, where the sun doesn't rise for several weeks. There are millions of other things that make the state great, but there's one place in particular that stands above the rest for all the right reasons. Nestled amidst the remote wilderness in Alaska, a paradoxical landscape emerges that defies expectations and ignites the flames of curiosity. The Great Kobuk Sand Dunes, a surreal expanse of shifting sands, beckon intrepid explorers to a world where contrast meld and mysteries abound. This improbable desert oasis tucked away in the Arctic wilderness stands as a testament to the Earth's boundless capacity for surprise. Located within the Kobuk Valley National Park, these dunes constitute an anomaly in a region more synonymous with ice and snow than with waves of sand. Situated near the Arctic Circle, the juxtaposition of desolation and the expanse is awe-inspiring. It's spread across an area of 25 square miles. These sand dunes challenge the preconceived notions of the Alaskan landscape. The origins of these dunes trace back thousands of years to a complex interplay of forces. The sands are not remnants of desertification, but rather a result of glacial activity that shaped the landscape during the last ice age. Millennia ago, retreating glaciers left behind enormous deposits of sand, which over time were molded by the relentless winds of the Arctic. This geological history transforms the dunes into a living testimony of Earth's transformations and the ceaseless cycle of change that shapes our world. These sand dunes harbor an inherent mystique that only deepens upon exploration. The mere existence of a desert within a region known for its icy landscapes has puzzled scientists and adventurers. Their location, surrounded by boreal forests and rolling tundra, presents an enigma, an arid expanse amidst Arctic greenery. This juxtaposition sparks questions about the delicate balance of ecosystems. It's a haven of biodiversity. This seemingly barren landscape is a refuge for diverse flora and fauna, showcasing the remarkable adaptability of life. Hardy plant species like willows and grasses establish a resilient foothold within the dunes, defying the odds of survival in an environment known for scarcity.
This has been a Cincinnati production. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos. If you'd like to support the channel, links are in the description.